Afternoon or good evening to all of you. Now the lecture today is the Sri Lankan economy and national policy. I have been taking this lecture for the past 4 years at the Institute of Engineers. So every year I keep on updating the presentation. So I will do the presentation first, and if you don't understand some of the things I say, please note it down, and during the question and answer session after the lecture, feel free to ask me any question you have. So basically, I am talking about the Sri Lankan economy and national policy. How I will go about with this presentation is, first I will speak on the policies and trends since independence, that is from 1948 till present. Then I will speak to you about the pros and cons, the positive and the negative sides of various economic policies, economic models that we have seen in Sri Lanka. Then I will talk about how policies are formulated. You know, you have heard about various policies like social market economy, free market economy, export promotion strategy, and so on and so forth. Various policy related issues, how national policies are formulated. Then I will speak about growth. While speaking about growth, I will also speak about structural changes and regional disparities, changes between various regions in the country. Like for instance, Ua province does not have the same level of development like the Western province. Why is that the case? Then I will go on to speak about the government budget. What does the finance minister do when he presents a budget in the parliament? What are the problems he faces? What is the importance of the budget? Which in very basic terms I will explain that. Then I will explain what the balance of payments is, because you may be seeing in the newspapers most of the time the word balance of payments used very frequently. What does it really mean? Then I will speak about the import-export structure of the economy, and finally some concluding remarks with the overall development policy in Sri Lanka. Right, now to start with policies and trends since independence. Now, as all of you know, at the time of independence, Sri Lanka from the British colonial rulers inherited an export economy dominated by three sectors: tea, rubber and coconut. The overall exports from tea, rubber and coconut amounted to 90% of our overall exports. There were hardly any industrial exports, and bulk of the exports of the country were agriculture related exports, spices, cinnamon, cloves, etc. And the 90% came from tea, rubber and coconut. Now, as time passed by, what did we see in Sri Lanka? We found that the export economy dominated by tea, rubber and coconut, policymakers wanted to change it and start some industries. So, from about 1955, we started to industrialize Sri Lanka. And the policy we selected to industrialize Sri Lanka is import substitution industries. Instead of importing a refrigerator, let us manufacture it here. Instead of importing a washing machine, let us manufacture it here. Instead of importing textiles, let us manufacture it here. So likewise, we started import substitution industrialization from the mid-1950s. So for this purpose, we need to close the economy a little bit, because if you have an open liberal economy, with free importation, we can't produce things domestically because of the import competition. If the foreign fridges are cheaper than the local refrigerator, how can you produce it here? Right? If the imported washing machine is cheaper than the domestic washing machine, you can't produce it here. So we need to protect the economy by closing it a little bit with high duties or tariffs, whatever. So that is how we pursued the import substitution industrialization strategy. Then around 1965, we partially opened up the economy, because when we are too closed also, it creates other problems. Some of these industries that grow under the protectionist wall, they get so used to protection that they don't improve quality without competition. So you can have shoddy refrigerators, bad quality washing machines, bad quality textiles, because they are not facing any competition. So in 1965 we partially opened up the economy, 65 to 70. Then again in 1970 we closed the economy. 70 to 77 we had a closed economy period, right, with lot of government intervention in the economy, nationalization and so on. Some of the private business were taken over by the government. So that type of a political regime we saw. Then of course in 1977 we once again opened up the economy. Once again opened up the economy, and the open economy thereafter remained in this country. Depending on the political party that was ruling the country, the open economy was tinkered around. Right? But basically the open economy remained. What was the reason why the open economy remained in this country is that you see after about the late 1980s, the socialist ideology, economies based on socialist ideology, communist ideology started falling apart with the falling apart of Soviet Union, Eastern European countries like Romania, Bulgaria, etc. coming out of communism. So there was no alternative ideology to the capitalist open economy. So the open economy in many countries started to remain, stabilize, and that is what we saw in Sri Lanka. Even though after 1977 we found several times change of government, the open economy remained. From time to time there was tinkering with the open economy. Some governments opening it even more, some government closing it a little bit, but basically the open economy remained. So that is what we saw in Sri Lanka over the years, right? So the open economy, so during this period, policies also changed in the sense that various government had various attitude towards policies in the country. Some governments gave more preference to social welfare programs. Some governments gave more importance to physical infrastructure development, like accelerated Mahavali development program or developing roads, highways, etc. Some governments gave more importance to social welfare, improving education, improving the health services, giving more handouts to the poor people like Janasavya or Samurdhi or whatever, right? So these changes we observed. Some government gave more importance to state-owned enterprises. Some other government gave more importance to the private industries, encourage the private sector growth, etc. Whatever it is, we saw different treatment of public and private sector, different treatment of subsidies and welfare. Subsidies in the sense that one government may give, say, quite a lot of subsidies to the industry, subsidies to agriculture in the form of say fertilizer subsidy, etc. Some other governments may not give that much importance to those things, withdraw them, etc. Those changes we saw. And also the first bullet point here, when economies open up, the governments give more importance to export oriented growth. When the economy is closed up, the government gives more importance to import substitution industrialization. You see, now over the years, when we kept on changing from one regime to another, what happened? The consistency of the policy in this country got disturbed. Because every 5 years, policies drastically change. That at least happened till 1977. So therefore, this is one of the reasons why, of course, among many other reasons, as you know, we had internal shocks in the form of southern insurrection, then we had the war in the north and east for nearly 25 years, then we had various other problems facing low prices for tea and rubber in the international market. So all these problems were there. But among those problems, one of the key issues was the continuous changing in policy. So due to that, Sri Lanka could not achieve the development level like a country like South Korea or Singapore. Because at the time of independence, Sri Lanka and South Korea had almost the same per capita income. Per capita income means the GDP, gross domestic product, you divide by the population. It was around 150. Around the late 1950s, both countries had the same GDP per capita income. But what is the GDP per capita income of South Korea today? 29,000 US dollars, whereas Sri Lanka's GDP per capita income today is 3,800 US dollars. So South Korea is around 6-7 times, right, richer, 7 times richer than Sri Lanka. So per capita income, though it does not take into account the distribution of income, basically say that on average per annum or per person, if the income is 3,800 in Sri Lanka, a South Korean earns around 28,000. So a person earns more money when there is more prosperity in the country. So Sri Lanka could not achieve due to these policy fluctuations from time to time, among other factors. Now, this policy fluctuation from time to time was based on economic ideology. We have one type of economic model, which is the welfare-oriented closed economy model, with the state as the engine of growth. So, what is this model? It depends on input substitution industrialization, ISI. This model says that, you know, if you are open too much to the foreign markets, the domestic economy cannot be developed. So to a very great extent, a country should produce its own industrial products. What are the industrial products? Say this laptop, the country should try to produce if it can. Right? Wristwatch, country try to produce if it can. These mics, without importing, try to produce in the country itself. And at the same time, a closed economy will give more importance to welfare measures, because all this is very much the thinking came from the communist ideology, the socialist ideology. So, you know, the labor, people are important. You must see the welfare and the prosperity of the people. So, therefore, the government has to do things to enhance, improve the prosperity of the people. So, give them free education, free health. If they are poor, give them a safety net package in the form of Samurdhi package or Janasavya, etc. So, that is one form of thinking. The other model is the growth-oriented open economy model, where the private sector is seen as the engine of growth and emphasis is on export-oriented industrialization. So this is open. That is, look, it says, look, a country cannot produce everything. It is cheaper to buy this wristwatch from abroad than producing it here. It is cheaper to buy these mics from abroad than producing it here, right? There are certain items that the country can produce. Say rice, the country can produce. then there are certain other things the country can produce. But everything the country cannot produce. So you must import the cheap items from the rest of the world and produce whatever you can and give more importance to exports. And in this model, the private sector is the engine of growth. Government is not going to nullify the people. That is, try to give people everything, welfare, free education, etc. This model believes in competition. That is, the individual should try to earn all his money, income, etc., be entrepreneurial, be energetic, and start industries or whatever the individual is engaged in, and this model gives more importance to export-oriented activities. Now, let us look at it this way. An export-oriented industry earns $1. Import substitution industry saves $1. So you can ask me, what is both are the same. Both type of ideologies are same. But economists have argued now that the export-oriented model is superior to the import substitution industrialization model because the earning capacity of $1 is much more than saving capacity of $1. Now look at it this way. Now Sri Lanka, if it is producing rice only to the domestic market, there is a limited population of 20 million people. So that is the market which the rice is produced, and we are saving the dollars without importing rice. Now if you are producing rice to the international market, we are not producing it to a 20 billion population, to the entire world population. Then you reap what is called economies of scale. You reduce your cost of production and induce more efficiency, and you earn more foreign exchange. So export-oriented industries earning capacity of foreign exchange is far more than the import substitution industry saving foreign exchange. That is why over the years the open economy became more popular and people started accepting it. That is why the socialist ideology gradually went out of steam, because some of the import substitution products, they can be inefficient, because if the entrepreneur knows, say an entrepreneur is producing ballpoint pens in this country, and the entrepreneur knows that there is no competition to the ballpoint pens. When there is no competition, the entrepreneur will not take that much effort to improve the quality of the product. Product quality improves only if there is competition. So that competition comes from the open economy, not from a closed economy. So that is why the second model finally won the debate, and most countries have the open economy with them in the contemporary world. Of course, you know, the political doctrine of various political parties in various countries can be either to the left or the right. But in countries like Sri Lanka, it has always been center left or center right. Or the mixed economy model. You take the best from both models and integrate it. Whichever model that one uses, of course now the open economy model is the one that Sri Lanka has adhered to. The important thing to keep in mind is that we have to be consistent and predictable in making policies. Then only the people who invest in the economy, especially the private sector, get the correct signal and invest. If I am told, if I invest this money in a particular industry, I will be exempted from taxes, then I will put the money there. But if I know that after I put the money, they are going to reverse the policy and say from this date onwards you will be taxed 20% for your investment, then I will be discouraged of putting that money to the industry. I might invest in something else. So the predictability and consistency of the policies are very important. Now let us see how national policy formulation has happened after the open economy came into operation in Sri Lanka. As all of you know, in 1977, only the open economy came into operation in this country. So first we had the open economy with structural adjustment. What is structural adjustment? The economy first grows with the agriculture sector as the dominant sector. Then the economy grows with the industrial sector as the dominant sector. Then the economy grows finally with the service sector as the dominant sector. That is how the structure changes in the economy. So the 1977 attempt was to create more and more industrialization in this country and shift from heavy dependence on this plantation economy, because the plantations were running out of steam. So that is why after 1977 opening up, we saw industries like ready-made garments, rubber products, gems and jewelry, ceramics, food and beverages, these industries moving forward. Then of course, as all of you know, in 1994 there was a change of government. With the change of government, what we saw during 94 to 2001, it was an open economy with more emphasis given on people's welfare, because there was this thinking that if you had too much of an open economy with giving lot of emphasis on structural adjustment, sometimes the burden of that adjustment falls on the poor people, and poor people find it difficult to come out of poverty. That is why some of the social welfare programs like this, Samurdhi, etc., have been strengthened. Pension schemes offered to workers in the informal sector like fishermen, farmers, etc. So all these things, which they called it open economy with a human face. Then 2002-2003 period, we had the open economy with rapid deregulation. There the thinking was that, look, we have an open economy, but still we have various controls and restrictions in the economy, because some of the legislation operating were the ones that were designed during the closed economy period. Say the termination of Workmen's Act in the labour market, or the Exchange Control Act for the foreign exchange market. These were designed long time ago, so in the 50s and the 40s, etc. So there was this thinking, we need new laws to govern the open economy, and a rapid deregulation was pursued. Then of course there was a change of government in 2004. We got an open economy with more regulations. There the thinking was deregulation is bad to the economy, in the sense that it weakens the state. You need a strong state, a government to drive the economy. So more regulations. Then 2006 to 2009 we had the open mixed economy. Then 2010 to 2014 we had the open mixed economy with a large public investment drive and more protection. You see, after the war ended only, some of these infrastructure programs like electricity power plants, ports, airports, highways, etc., with large public investment started. So we had an open mixed economy. Mixed economy was not 100% open, in the sense that there were many things from socialist thinking embedded into the open economy, and some degree of protection for domestic industries like industries producing shoes, cosmetics, etc. Then today we have what is once again the open economy with structural adjustment. Some of the politicians like to call it social market economy. They say now we have a social market economy, where basically it's an open economy with structural adjustment like what we had from 77 to 1993, but giving some importance to social side. So from this, what one has to gather is the following. Roles of the public and private sector in mainstreaming issues to development agenda. You see, the roles of public and private sector differs in various models. Though we are now more oriented towards the export-oriented economy, the public sector and private sector, under one model the private sector will play a more role. In the other, the public sector will play more role. Now, if you look at the period 2006 to 2014, the public sector was given a huge role with all these public investment schemes and so on and so forth. Privatization was stopped. Ceylon Electricity Board and Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, all these loss-making enterprises were under state management. Now, with the change of government, there is new thinking. These should be either privatized under some sort of formula. Private sector should play a more important role in the economy, so on and so forth. So this is how national policy formulation takes place. And the policy formulation is also based on the election promises that are given. Sometimes, election promises are given that cannot be fulfilled. So, on that basis, this economic policy formulation is made. Right. Now that I have spoken about economic policy formulation, what needs to be emphasized is, under whatever policy framework, the country should move forward. That means economic growth should be there. So, say your salary was 25,000 last year, you expect it to be 30,000 this year, right? And that will come only if the economy is growing. It is only if the economy is growing, whoever is recruiting you will have adequate money to give you a salary increase. When your salary increase, you demand for more goods. Then the economy has to produce more goods. Then that also is reflected in the growth. So the economy has to grow. For the economy to grow, there has to be investment. Either the government does the investment or the private sector does the investment, or both of them. Some governments give more importance to public sector investment, as I said earlier. Some governments give more importance to private sector investment in their policy. So with the investment comes the jobs. Say if the government invests in a highway from Colombo to the airport, with that construction there will be more jobs coming. With more jobs coming, people will have more income in their hand. With more income in the hand, there will be more demand for goods. All that will contribute to growth, right? So the growth comes from four sectors in the economy: agriculture sector, industrial sector, services sector, construction sector. So those are the four main. So what the structural transformation in the economy means? That the economy gradually, the dominant sector will no longer be the agriculture sector. Now I told you at the start that 90% of our exports came from our agriculture sector, tea, rubber, coconut at the time of independence. It accounted for 35% of our GDP. Today the agriculture sector is only 9% of GDP. It has shrunk. And the industrial sector has expanded, 25% of GDP. So that is what development is all about. You shift from agriculture to industry, industry to services. Services is a large chunk of our economy, about 57% of GDP. So while the country is growing, there can be growth disparities. One region can grow faster than the other. What is the reason for that? If the infrastructure, etc. are well in place in a particular province, most of the investment will come to that region. So that is why if you take the western province, it controls about 43% of our GDP compared to a province like Uva, which may control only about 8% of our GDP. Why? Because all the infrastructure is here. The roads, then the electricity, water, housing, etc. Airports, ports, all that. So industries will obviously invest in a place where the infrastructure is more favorable to them. Because the private sector will not put money to have their own electricity, have their own water, have their own roads. No. They should be all done by the government for the private sector to put their money and start industries. So that is why the regional disparities exist. How to get rid of regional disparities? The government should go to the provinces and invest. If the government So some governments attempted. Now, as you know, the last government wanted to take development to the southern province. So airport was started in the southern province, seaport was started, various other development activities were done. But if you don't do good feasibility studies and start these things, those development activities end up as white elephants. So if you are trying to develop a province with infrastructure so that investors come, it has to be done. Whatever projects you do, you have to do it after a feasibility study of its viability, not on political basis, right? So growth disparities can be addressed. Many countries have, in fact, around 2005, the amount of GDP commanded by Western province was 50%. Now it has reduced to about 43%, right? So you spread development. Now North and the Eastern province, their GDPs, what they command is very small. North may be around 5%. Eastern province may be about 7%. Why? Because of the war destruction, etc. Now these provinces, the infrastructure, water, electricity, road, everything, hospitals, schools, everything has to be developed. Then only these provinces will be able to make a larger contribution to the economy and reduce the disparities between the Western province and them. So investment is very much necessary, both by the government and by the private sector. So the government should have money to invest. Private sector should also have money to invest. You will have money to invest only if you have savings, right? If the private sector has savings, they will expand, they will put money to open an industry, or if they have an industry, they will put more money to expand it and create more jobs, etc. and produce more. Government will invest if it has money. If it doesn't have money, the government will borrow. And borrowing also has a limit. So this is what is economic growth is all about. Right. So if a government is to provide this investment, if the government is also to provide some of the services like education and health, the government should have money. From where does the government get the money? The government has to have money for many things, to pay wages of the people who are working in the public sector, in various ministries, provincial councils, district development councils, Pradeshia Sabhas, right, Grama Niladhari divisions, etc. Then government staff in public schools, government staffs in hospitals, right, etc. So the government has to pay wages and salaries. Government has to pay interest payment. Now if the government borrows, there is an interest on what you borrow. So you have to pay the interest of those. Then subsidies and transfers. What are transfers? Transfers are the government transfers, say pension payment. It's a transfer. People in the public service, after they retire, they receive a pension. So the government has to transfer money to pay the pension. Subsidies for all sorts of things. Electricity subsidy, water subsidy, fertilizer subsidy. Government has to have money. From where does the government get the money? Government gets the money by taxing the people. You tax the people. There is tax revenue and non-tax revenue. But taxing is the main component of revenue. You tax companies. You impose income tax on individuals. Then you have the indirect taxation, value-added tax. When you buy a commodity, the tax is inbuilt into the price. So that tax goes to the government. You go and eat in the restaurant, part of the bill is the tax to the government. So that's the money coming to the government. So from that money only the government provides the health services, education services and do all these other things. Then also government needs money for capital expenditure. That is government, if it is starting new project, say Norachale electricity power plant or building a toll road, southern highway or whatever, it will, or opening a new school or a school laboratory, then the government has to give money, capital expenditure. So where is the money? If the revenue is not adequate, the government will have to borrow money. It can borrow from the domestic market, it can borrow from the international market, or it can get aid from a donor. So if the Chinese are willing to give some money, fine. You use that money to open the power plant, or you use that money. Of course, this money is not coming free of charge. There is interest, whichever way. So for capital expenditure, social expenditure, infrastructure, government has to find money. So most often in Sri Lanka, the expenditure of the government is more than revenue, because expenditure is the current expenditure to pay the salaries, give subsidies, and for the transfers. In addition, there is capital expenditure, where you have to give for various projects, build bridges, build roads, modernize roads, etc. So sometimes, most often, Sri Lanka's expenditure is more than the revenue, but we get from our taxes. Then you have a budget deficit. Budget cannot be filled. So what do you do to balance the budget? You borrow. And from where can you borrow? You can borrow from domestic sources or foreign sources. Domestic sources you can borrow from banks. There are banks in the country. You can borrow from the banks. Government can borrow from the banks. And how does the government borrow from the banks? It can issue treasury bills and treasury bonds. You give a treasury bill to the bank and say that this is for 1 million. Give me 1 million, this is the treasury bill. When in its maturity, you will get 1.3 million in 1 year. Right? And government borrows from banks. Non-bank sources. What are non-bank sources? Provident funds, employment provident funds, insurance corporation, National Savings Bank. These are non-bank sources. You can borrow from non-bank sources also. If the government is exhausted with borrowing from these things, what does the government do? Engages in foreign borrowing. And borrow from non-conditional borrowing from generous donors like Japan, China, countries that can give money. Or if you want to adhere to conditions to put the economy right and borrow, you go to the IMF. You can borrow. Sometimes if you borrow too much, you get inflation. Because if you have too much money in the economy, then the supply of goods, then there is inflation. Because too much money is circulating in the economy, too few goods. So you have inflation. So all that are once in the finance minister's mind when he presents the budget every November in this country. How do you balance the budget? What are the new revenue proposals? What are the new expenditure proposals? How do you balance the budget? Right? So all sorts of problems the finance minister can encounter in the process of balancing the budget. Budget is a very important component of the overall macroeconomy of the country. Right. Now, in addition to the budget, there is another important component in the economy called the balance of payments. And my entry point to that is that now in an economy, what I said earlier, we can't produce everything in this economy. This economy doesn't have oil, so we have to import it. Certain foodstuff we don't have. We don't have enough flour in this country. True, we have rice flour, but we don't have wheat flour. We have to import it. If not, we can't produce the bread. Right? Then we have to import other things. We don't produce adequate textiles for our ready-made garment industry. So we have to import some of the textiles. Right? So likewise, now when the war was going on, we were not manufacturing rocket-propelled launchers and multiple rocket launchers or helicopters and jets. So we have to import them. So a country has to import to fulfill certain economic needs while the economy is growing, right? While balancing the budget, it has to import many things, right? Now, to import these items, the country needs foreign exchange. Now, from where do you get foreign exchange? Of course, you can keep borrowing and get the dollars or sterlings, but a country cannot do that. But the country should also earn foreign exchange. best way to earn foreign exchange is by exporting. That is why the export-oriented model becomes important. You export and earn foreign exchange. But in Sri Lanka, the import bill is about 20 billion US dollars. Export bill is about 10 billion US dollars. So there is a huge gap there. That is called the trade balance. Now the trade balance gets offset by certain other things. Now you know that we have a large number of workers overseas. Out of Sri Lanka's 20 million population, 2 million people work overseas. And out of that, bulk of them work in the Gulf Middle East region. So they send remittances to their families. Our workers in Europe, East Asia, Canada, Australia, all of them send money to the country. So that is called remittances. That's about 7 billion US dollars. Then you know that in this country, we attract quite a lot of tourists. About 1.8 million tourists come to the country. They also bring foreign exchange. So to a certain extent, that gap, 20 billion export, 20 billion imports, 10 billion export, to an extent gets filled up with the remittances and tourism earning. That's about 7 billion altogether. But still there is a gap, about 3 billion gap. In addition, there is the capital account of the balance of payments. That is all sorts of foreign direct investment coming in, money coming to the stock exchange, so on and so forth, and money going out of Sri Lanka. That is for repaying debt and the principal. Sometimes you pay interest, all the interest, and when the time period comes, you have to pay the principal, the full amount, in addition to interest income. So there is a lot of outflow from the country. So when the outflow of foreign exchange of the country is more than the inflow, you get a balance of payments deficit. Now current in Sri Lanka, we have a 2 billion US dollar balance of payments deficit. Now how do you fill this balance of payments deficit? You have to engage in foreign borrowing. So when you open the newspaper, sometimes you find the government has gone for a sovereign borrowing from the international capital market, 1.5 billion or whatever, with high interest rates, 6.87% and so on. Why does the government do that? To fill in this gap. So you see, there is a limit to borrowing, because if you keep borrowing, you can get into a debt trap, because more you borrow, you get into debt. It's like an individual borrowing. I borrow from Sampath Bank, Bank of Ceylon, People's Bank, all these banks. I am indebted to all these banks, and one day, if I am not paying my interest and loans properly, the banks are going to come after me, right, and acquire my property, my collateral. Because when I am taking a loan, I mortgage something, my collateral, the house, my vehicle, etc. So if the bank feels that I don't have the earning capacity to pay what I have borrowed, they come and get my house under parate execution, my vehicle, everything gone. This can happen to a country also. That is what has happened to Greece today. Countries like Argentina at one time, and they could not pay the debt, they get into a debt trap, debt crisis. Then to rescue, there is only one borrower of last resort, the IMF, International Monetary Fund. You go to them and say, look, we need money. They will give you money, but then they will give you strict conditions. You have to do this, do that, etc. Cut subsidies, reduce pensions, privatize all the loss-making state-owned enterprises, etc., etc. No salary increases to public servants, etc. So then you accept the package, then you can get their money to do to repay debt. That is how it works. So country has to ensure that it does not get into too much of debt, and the balance of payment should be substantially under control. If you have the surplus in the balance of payment, all the more better. Then you have a good grip of economic management. Now, to get a surplus of the balance of payments, you have to export, earn more and more from our exporting. Now, I told you earlier that our exports brings only about 10 billion US dollars to this country. That is Now industrial exports are dominating. Tea only accounts for 14% of our overall exports. And industrial exports are close to 75 to 80% now in this country. Ready-made garments, rubber products, gems and jewelry, ceramics, etc. So how do we increase our exports more and more? So we must have, more access to foreign markets. European Union, if we have more access to the European market, all the more better. We can export more. So that is why when we lost the GSP plus scheme, now GSP stands for Generalized System of Preferences. European Union reduced the tariff for Sri Lankan products under GSP scheme, so that whatever we export to Europe, we pay less taxes. So then we can export more. Soon after tsunami hit Sri Lanka in 2005, as a gesture, European Union gave us GSP plus. So from that, lot of our exporters benefited, exporting to European Union, and it brought more foreign exchange. Suddenly in 2010, under human rights and all sorts of other issues, GSP plus was taken away from us. Then you still have access to the European market, but the taxes or tariffs are higher. So that is why the government is trying its best to get this GSP plus back, to have more access to the European market and get more export earnings. Why does a country go into free trade agreements with other countries? Regional trading arrangements like SAFTA, South Asia Free Trade Agreement, bilateral free trade agreements like the Indo-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, Pakistan-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement. Why? To get more market access to other foreign markets. Of course, it's a two-way process. While Sri Lanka has access to that market, their exports will also come to Sri Lanka more liberally. So then the negotiations of the free trade agreement should be such that we have to have a design where our local industries are not too much affected by import inflows from a free trade agreement. If you design it that way, then both countries can benefit, and that can be done. That is why a lot of free trade agreements are spreading around the world today. So Sri Lanka has the SAFTA, South Asia Free Trade Agreement, under the SAARC umbrella. SAARC has 8 countries: India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Maldives and Afghanistan. 8 countries. So we are a member of that regional grouping, and under that there is a free trade arrangement called the SAFTA, South Asia Free Trade Agreement. India and Sri Lanka has a free trade agreement for more access for Sri Lankan products to the Indian market. After the free trade agreement came into operation, Sri Lanka's exports to India has increased to about 5.5% of our overall exports, or 6%, from 1% before the free trade agreement. Indian imports also has increased. Bulk of it, of course, outside the free trade agreement. With Pakistan-Sri Lanka FTA also, our exports have increased to Pakistan after the FTA came into operation, but not that much. Pakistan's imports also has increased to Sri Lanka, but not that much, because these free trade agreements, as time passes, their power to bring about more benefits to the country reduces. So then you have to fine-tune the free trade agreement. Then only you go into economic partnership agreements, where with the trade in goods, you bring trade in services and investment also into the free trade agreement. So one of the things we expect in our overall development process is to export diversification. Our exports should diversify, right? Because you see, I told you at the beginning, Korea and Sri Lanka were at the same level of development. But today, Korea is in a very advanced stage of development. It produces Samsung, electronics, televisions, mobile phones. It produces vehicles, Hyundais, Kias, etc. Right? It has come to an advanced stage of industrialization with electronic products, light engineering products, many refrigerators, Samsung refrigerator, LG refrigerator, all these are Korean products. just like Japan did in the 80s and the 90s. Now Korea has come to that stage, right? So Sri Lanka is nowhere near that stage of industrialization. That is where the country should aim at moving towards, right? Then you get more earnings from the exports. More earnings you get from export, you have a better control of the balance of payments. Then you don't have to depend on too much foreign loans and make the country indebted. So that's very important. So in that process, of course, you know, the imports are also equally important, and these free trade agreements are partly is good for the imports, certain imports which we don't produce. Now look at the Sri Lankan vehicle market. A Maruti car from India with low tariffs will be cheap, and that will cater to the middle class in this country. A person who cannot afford to buy a say a Toyota can buy a Maruti now, right? And these are not items that are produced in Sri Lanka. So from a free trade agreement you can get that product. Or for example, a motorcycle. Sri Lanka doesn't produce motorcycle. So if you can buy a cheaper motorcycle from India under the free trade agreement, all the more better for the country. Right? So these are the advantages. Of course, in a free trade agreement, the competing products, you must ensure that they are in the negative list or they are not subject to the free trade agreement. That is why when we designed the India-Sri Lanka free trade agreement, items like onions, potatoes, chilies, which compete with our farmers' products, were kept under the tariff wall without exposing it to the free trade agreement. Right? So the point I am trying to emphasize is that imports are equally important for our economy's functioning, because through imports you can use those imports as inputs to your export products and because if you look at our ready-made garments, the value addition is quite small, because lot of our buttons, elastic, thread, bulk of it is imported. We do only the tailoring job and few value additions. But since the turnover is large, though the import component is large, the overall foreign exchange is still more than tea. Right. So now I come to my final slide, which basically says that overall development policy, we can have the import exports, we can have our budget balancing policy, etc. But if to maintain the economy, to have our foreign exchange, if we keep borrowing for our investment and consumption, then you know this borrowing can put us into a debt trap, because sometimes we borrow not for development activities but to repay the maturing debt. That is called debt rollover. You are borrowing to repay the maturing debt, not to invest in a Norarchale project or build a highway or whatever. Okay. So now, especially during the year before last, 2013-2014 period, Sri Lanka's debt was increasing in a very rapid way, right? We had a lot of debt to pay for countries like China. You see, in a debt-driven development strategy, it is all right to borrow and develop a country as long as those projects gives a revenue for you to repay that debt. You see, if you use that foreign money to open, say, a cricket stadium in Suryawara or a film studio in Ranminitan or airport in Mattala, you see, the returns may not come, because you see, these projects may not have been subject to proper feasibility studies before starting. There could have been a political dimension on these projects. Whereas if you start a project that brings return quickly, now for example a project like a highway to the airport, now that is bringing revenue because frequently cars are using the toll road, the toll is collected, etc. So that gives a capacity to repay some of that debt. So whenever you use debt, you must ensure that you invest that money on a project that gives you income to repay the debt. If not, debt keeps accumulating. And that is what happened during 2013-14 period. And that is why after the change of government, we saw the switching of strategy from debt development strategy to attracting more foreign direct investment and export promotion as a development strategy in this country. So, and that was inevitable given the debt situation that Sri Lanka had arrived at. So, when we pursue our economic development strategy, we have to ensure that Sri Lanka does not get into a debt trap in the overall development strategy and ensure that the country earns much foreign exchange as possible from its export promotion strategy. So with these thoughts, I will end now and request you to ask questions. Please ask questions. Because this exam, some of the questions that will come will be in some these areas that I touched upon, right? You can always go into the Google and see further details on this. There are a lot of books on the Sri Lankan economy. Each topic one can go into detail, but this is a very broad overview that I have given you all. I know that all of you are engineers and may not necessarily have pursued the subject of economics either in your university or in school or whichever place you obtain your training. So some of these areas that I emphasized may not be areas you're very familiar with, though these words you would have come across in the newspapers from time to time of these free trade agreements, balance of payments and so on, but reasonably good knowledge about these areas should be there for this examination as well as for general knowledge in particular, right? So that's very important. That's very important. So now if you look at, for example, countries that have done well in this world. Now, for example, Japan, which was virtually razed to the ground during the Second World War with the Hiroshima, Nagasaki bombing, etc. How did it become an industrial power? Because Japan, how did corporations like Mitsubishi, Nissan, Toyota, Sony, Hitachi, JVC, how did these companies emerge in Japan, not in Sri Lanka, with our entrepreneurs? Because you see, the Japanese government, when our governments were giving this free rice and rice rations and giving all sorts of welfare measures to the people, Japan from the very start pursued an open economy and encouraged the private entrepreneurs, private sector to do research. The government itself invested quite a lot on R&D, research and development, encouraged entrepreneurs to go into more innovative projects, gave export awards for innovative things that they did and made the whole population very disciplined in building up the economy. So Japan thought that the only way they can resurrect their economy is by competing with the rest of the world. So at that time, now if you look at the Japanese automobile industry, at that time the world leader in automobiles were European countries like England, producing Rovers, Morris, Vauxhalls and all these cars, and France producing vehicles like Peugeots, Renaults and Citroens and those type of cars. They were the world leaders in manufacturing motor vehicles. So Japan thought if we are to compete with them, we must manufacture motor vehicles that have something in addition to what those motor vehicles have. If they have poor after sales service, we will produce a motor vehicle which has better after sales service. If they produce a motor vehicle with 10 gadgets, we will produce a motor vehicle with 15 gadgets at a lower price. Like that, they strategized those things, invested in R&D, and that is how they managed to penetrate already dominant market by the Europeans in motor vehicles, and made their Toyotas, Nissans become quality products in the world market. So much so, Japanese vehicles became the top class vehicles. So likewise, a country like Korea did not get discouraged because Japan was producing all the vehicles, Korea was initially known as Korea, even in Sri Lanka, Shanti was used to call this is a Korea. Why? Because Korea was such an underdeveloped country. Now, early days, people used to say a Korean Hyundai or a Kia vehicle or etc. These are shoddy products. Who will buy them? But then they kept on doing research, investing on those vehicles, and managed to score over Japanese vehicles in certain areas. They made the same quality car at a cheaper price with more comfort. So they managed to capture the motor vehicle market. So that is how they have gone about. You see, they always look at the market, study it, and produce those items and try to stay in the front. So one of the main mistakes that Sri Lanka did was, to the science, engineering areas, the policy makers did not give that much importance. So that is why we did not invest much on R&D, research and development, and encourage entrepreneurship to mature in the economy, so that industrialization moves from this from labor-intensive, easy products like ready-made garments to the more sophisticated light engineering products, electronic products, avionic products and so on. We have not been able to move. So the point I am trying to make is that in a country's development process, you have to invest in various areas, right? If the government has to first invest, then the private sector gets encouraged, invest and move forward. So that type of thing did not happen. Now a country like India, for example, India's story is different. Now India found it very difficult to improve the quality of their products. They have had the Hero bicycle. Now what they did was they went to a joint venture with Honda in Japan, and they produced what was called the Hero Honda motorcycle. Honda motorcycle, gradually they improved the quality. So the same Japanese Honda motorcycle at a cheaper price to suit the Indian roads, they developed. That is how India started going into this light engineering manufacturing sector, and they did that similarly with some of their motor vehicles and buses. For example, they had a bus company called Ashok. They went for a joint venture with Leyland. Leyland was a well-known British bus company. Ashok Leyland was produced through joint venture. Through that, they improved the quality and put the Ashok Leyland bus into operation. That is the company that came to Sri Lanka in 1982, and we started assembling Lanka Ashok Leyland bus eventually, right? But it's an assembling operation. It's not a overall manufacturing thing. So the point I'm trying to make is that some countries, if they find it difficult to do it on their own, can go always for joint ventures with other countries and then produce that product and take full control over it eventually, right? So that is also a way of going about in to higher stages of industrialization. So these are all factors that we have to keep in mind in the overall development process in a country, because a country cannot keep depending on remittances and tourism flows for foreign exchange. It has always got to develop its export sector and gain more foreign exchange to the country for the overall development process. Right. Any questions?
When we change from export to import subsidy industrialization, I think it's that kind of setup. Engineers have more responsibility of inventing or developing new things. So when we do that in 1955, let's say, how successful was that? Was there any initiatives or developments in the country?
Yeah, I mean, you see, the certain import substitution industries have been successful and come to a very high level. Now, for example, if you take our Cecil refrigerator, that started as during the import substitution era. Over the years, it has developed and it's now a large import substitution industry. Now it's controlled by Singer. And the Singer refrigerator can compete with any imported refrigerator in this country, right? Whether it is LG or Samsung, it caters to a particular class and it is there. So likewise, if you look at, for example, our Ceylon biscuits, Munchie biscuits, right? Whether it is a lemon puff or a ginger nut or whatever the biscuit is, now that biscuit can easily compete with a foreign biscuit, because over the years the company has invested in the quality of the product, etc., so that it can compete and this thing. So likewise, there are many Noritake porcelain, for example, which was a Japanese, with Japan, the joint venture investment, the porcelain products that it produces, it has gone a long way to become a very successful industry in this country. So likewise, you know, we can find many import substitution industries that have done well and matured to a stage where some of them have come to a stage of exporting also, right? Initially starting as an import substitution industry, but now they are in a position to export or sell in foreign markets. Now take a furniture company like Damro. Damro was a furniture company catering to the domestic market, you know, settees and TV tables and shelves, etc. Now once they got the confidence and the quality of the product, now they have several showrooms in southern India and they are selling their furniture products there. So you see, industries that start as import substitution industries, while catering to the domestic market, can become exporters also over the years if they improve the quality and develop the confidence to compete in those markets. I just gave you a handful of examples, but there are many. But the thing is that we have not, these are all simple products which even Thailand can do, Bangladesh can do. We have not gone to the sophisticated products like producing motor vehicles or electronic items, right? Electronic items where you are able to compete with the global giants. Now, for example, take in the 1990s, the most popular mobile phone was Nokia. We had never even heard of a Samsung or a Huawei telephone, right? Nokia or Sony Ericsson, these were the phones that were available in the market. Then Apple came gradually into the market. Once from the digital to this, what do you call it, electronic or use a name for these new phones, what do you call them? Smartphones. Once the smartphones came, the Koreans from nowhere, they came with their Samsung Galaxy phone, right? And now it is the market leader in the world. They control about close to 29% of the global mobile phone market compared to 19% by Apple. And Nokia is nowhere now, 4% of the market, right? So, how did that happen? I mean, great European giant Nokia controlling the entire mobile phone market at one time, they were not ready to compete and do the modernization that was required to go forward. Then the other players who saw the market niche came about and then captured the global market and made an impact. And they sustained the momentum with changing trends in the world. So that is what the exporters should do. They must read the consumers well and keep developing these products and move forward. And that is the lesson for our exporters also to compete in the global economy. One cannot say that, we are a small country, therefore we can't compete with this country. No, you see, that is not the case, right? Now, do we say that, look, we have a 20 million population and India has a 1.3 billion population. So India selects its cricket team of 11 members from 1.3 billion population. We select our cricket team from a 20 million population. So we can't play cricket with India because obviously they will have a superior team. No, there are times when Sri Lanka has beaten India in many cricket games. So competition in the market is also like that. The country size doesn't matter. Korea is a small country. Singapore is an even smaller country. They are competing very effectively in the global market. Okay? Right. So if there are no questions, I will end here. But if there are questions, I will be happy to answer. Right. Thank you very much.